Hello and welcome to today's webinar on the Wisconsin Perinatal Quality Collaborative Human Milk Feeding Initiative. I'm Kyle Mounts. I'm the Program Director at WAPC, and I provide administrative support for WISPIC itself. I'm going to be joined a little bit later by Lisa Locken, who's going to talk about the peridata.net applications included in this initiative. As many of you know, earlier this year, members of WISPIC decided to make human milk feeding the initiative for 2017. And when the group sat around thinking about what's going to be the major objective of this initiative, they decided as many babies as possible receive human milk. In the spirit of WISPIC itself, we wanted to make this focus broad enough that people from a number of settings could participate, given how important human milk is to a baby who's developing and growing. And so when we developed this initiative, we wanted to make sure we had focus on prenatal care, care during hospitalization, and also the use of human milk after discharge. So with that in mind, WISPIC decided to identify 9 measures for this initiative. And during this talk, I'm going to talk about the specific measures in more detail and some of the numerators and denominators that we would be asking people to look at, and also how those data can be collected during the process. As I mentioned, then Lisa will talk about peridata.net and the application of that technology in terms of collecting and evaluating data, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how you can participate in this and the benefits to you and your organizations for participating. But now back to the measures. As I mentioned, we identified 9. The first is prenatal education, and for anybody who participated in the hypertension initiatives, we did have some consumer education measures identified there also. The next 2 measures relate to skin-to-skin contact, first after delivery and then for procedures. Number 4 relates to rooming in. Number 5, supplementation. Number 6, pumping or manual expression of breast milk after separation. Number 7, human milk in the NICU. Number 8, human milk feeding after discharge. And number 9, exclusive human milk feeding after discharge. So the first measure is prenatal education, and for that we've set a goal of 100% documented prenatal education on human milk feeding. Realizing that this is a measure that could be adopted by people in public health settings or prenatal care settings or WIC settings, we wanted to allow for a way to measure this. So what we decided to do was take a look at a numerator that would include all patients receiving prenatal care who delivered in the data collection month with documented prenatal education on human milk feeding during at least 1 prenatal visit. So this is going to identify the people who actually have documented documentation of receiving that education. Now, all patients receiving prenatal care who delivered in the data collection month would be the denominator. So in each of these, the denominator defines the population of interest, and the numer specifically identifies the people who met the criteria that we set for these measures. For data collection, a lot of this may fall into the area of manual abstraction, but we wanted to make sure that if there was an electronic health record that could be used to collect this data, that we would encourage people to look into that technology, because it can make some of this much easier as far as collecting the data. The second measure is skin-to-skin after delivery. We've tied this into human milk feeding because of the connection between the bonding, because of the connection between that skin-to-skin contact and successful human milk feeding breastfeeding over time. In addition, there are other potential benefits too. As many of you may know, there's an effect on the neonatal microbiome where the baby then gets exposed to mom's bacteria on her skin, which can help promote a more normal and healthier development as the baby gets older. So for this measure, we want to look at 90% of mothers holding healthy term newborns defined as you see before you, skin to skin, uninterrupted for at least 60 minutes or until the completion of the first feeding, beginning within 1 hour of birth for uncomplicated vaginal births and within 2 hours of uncomplicated cesarean deliveries. Now it sounds like a lot, but because of peri-data that Lisa will be talking about, this can be much easier than you may expect at initial glance. The numerator for this is going to be obviously all healthy term newborns who get that skin-to-skin contact with mom for at least 60 minutes, as we saw in the measure itself. We have identified some specific exclusions that you can see on the screens. 2 of those are related to the newborns, like if those are the bottom 2, if a baby needs to go to special care or neonatal intensive care units after birth, or if it's a newborn whose mom is going to adopt the baby out, those would be exclusions. And then the 2 maternal exclusions are at the top. Newborns of moms who are not responsive or are unstable following birth, and also newborns of mothers with severe illness that prevents them from caring for their infants, for example, sepsis. Now the denominator for this particular measure is all healthy term newborns born via vaginal or cesarean birth. And again, we have the same exclusions, and we put those on both of those slides as kind of a reminder for that. Now data collection, I mentioned peridata.net, and again Lisa will talk about some of the additions that have been made to peridata.net that will facilitate the collection of this data. And we will also have a form available to support manual abstraction of the data from the records. Related to Measure 2 is Measure 3, and that relates to skin-to-skin contact during newborn procedures and assessments that are done within the first hour after uncomplicated vaginal deliveries. We had considered looking at cesarean deliveries, but because there can be so much going on at the time, we thought that that might not be possible during that time period, so we focused on vaginal deliveries for this particular measure. For this one, you can see the numerator, all healthy term newborns for whom necessary routine newborn procedures and assessments are performed within the first hour while the mother is holding skin to skin after uncomplicated vaginal births. And we're using the same exclusion criteria that we used in Measure 2 for this one as well. You can see the denominator, and it's similar to the denominator of Measure 2 with the same exclusions. And again, data collection could be by peridata.net or manual abstraction. Measure 4 looks at the mom and baby dyad after delivery itself in those first few hours. And the goal of this one is 90% of healthy term newborns, regardless of feeding method, remain with their mothers greater than or equal to 23 hours per day. You can see the numerator for this one. It's going to be all the healthy term newborns who meet that with these exclusions. And note newborns of mothers or their support person who have diminished responsiveness to the infant or are otherwise unstable following birth. And then some of the rest of the exclusions are similar to what we saw in the previous 2 measures. Moms with severe illness, newborns with a diagnosis that requires admission to special care or neonatal intensive care units, and newborns whose moms plan to adopt them out and who choose not to have that particular contact. And you can see the denominator here as well, all healthy term newborns with those exclusion criteria. Data collection, again, we'll be able to use peridata.net or manual abstraction. Measure 5 addresses the issue of supplementation. And for that one, we've selected a measure that says less than 30% of healthy term human milk-fed infants are supplemented with something other than human milk during the first 2 days of life. When we were looking at the specific goal for this, the 30%, we took a look at several sources and decided that this would probably be as reasonable a number as any. With any of these measures, a lot of it's going to depend on what your baseline is. The goal is to improve what you're doing. So if you were in a situation where you were already having less than 30% of healthy term infants who were supplemented, the question would be, could that be reduced anymore? Are there things that you potentially could do that could encourage more of those infants to receive human milk? The numerator includes all women who are separated from their infants for a medical complication.
Hey, Kyle, I think that's the
Yes, it is. When I created these, I will apologize for that, but I put the wrong numerator and denominator on there for this particular measure. But the numerator itself is going to be any of the infants who are supplemented with something other than human milk during the first 2 days of life, and the denominator would be all those infants who are born healthy at term.
So I believe that's essentially the PCO5 measure.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. So many of you may already be collecting PCO5, and so that would fall directly into that. Thank you. Okay. Now, measure 6 relates to pumping or manual expression of human milk, breast milk. And the goal for this is to increase by 5 to 15 percentage points the number of women separated from their infants for a medical condition who pump or manually express milk within 6 hours of separation during maternal hospitalization. And note that after the percentage points there's an asterisk that says that sites will select the target based on an assessment of their baseline. We realize that there can be wide variation in the percentage of moms who actually do this already at this time, but again, the goal will be to improve that over time. Now, the numerator for this is all women who are separated from their infants for a medical condition during maternal hospitalizations who pump or manually express breast milk within 6 hours of separation. And for this, we developed 2 exclusionary criteria: mothers who are not responsive or unstable following birth, and mothers with a severe illness that prevents them from caring for their infants, for example, sepsis. And then the denominator is going to be all women who are separated from their infants for a medical condition during maternal hospitalization. Again, for this, you see that data collection can be by either peridata.net or manual abstraction. We introduced Measure 7 because of its applicability to the NICU population. As many of you probably know, preterm infants are at especially high risk of problems like necrotizing enterocolitis if they do not receive human milk in the NICU. And so this particular measure says increase the infants with a birth weight of 1,500 grams or less, the very low birth weight infants, who receive any human milk during their 28th day of life in the NICU. And to quantify this measure, we're using a numerator of all infants with a birth weight of 1,500 grams or less who are 28 days old in the collection month who receive any human milk on their 28th day of life. And then the denominator will include infants with a birth weight of 1,500 grams or less who are 28 days old in the collection month itself. And data collection be by peridata.net or manual abstraction. The final 2 measures look at human milk after discharge. And for measure 8, we're looking at increasing human milk feeding at 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 6, and 12 months. The reason for those ranges were to accommodate how WIC measures human milk use after discharge, but also to take into consideration when infants might see their pediatric care provider. And so this gives all those people a chance to measure this, to follow this particular measure. So the numerator will be infants who receive human milk at the times indicated, and the denominator would be all infants who are seen at the times indicated. Data collection will be an electronic, local electronic health record if that's available, or manual abstraction. And then the final measure is exclusive human milk feeding. You can see that this is going to be at the same time periods, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, and 6 months. We've eliminated the 12 months because of the use of exclusivity and the strong likelihood that infants would be receiving solid foods at that time, also at 12 months. The numerator is all infants who receive human milk exclusively at the times indicated, and the denominator, all infants who are seen at those times. Data collection, again, by local electronic health record or manual abstraction. Now, we've gone over a lot of measures, and we've done that rather quickly because if you're interested in these, we will have this information available on the website in the near future to look at more. For people who are looking at these, we are not expecting that anybody who's interested in participating follows all measures, because these measures were developed to span the entire perinatal period. And not everybody necessarily has access to moms and babies during that period. So the things for selecting measures that you'd have to consider are things like what's important where you work, what are your outcomes related to these measures, an assessment of what you think you can reasonably change and what you can improve with that. So again, participation, you don't have to select all the measures, but just think about the ones that will drive the quality and increase the number of babies who are receiving human milk. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about PeriData, since that's is a way of collecting data for 6 out of the 9 measures. Okay,
Thank
Lisa.
You, Kyle. We did take a look at these screens to build, and a couple things I want you to note. Would there be some more abstraction of charts to get after this? Yes, there will. However, what we would like to do is start incorporating more sort of quality improvement type measures into peridata.net, so that rather than doing one thing in one area, another thing somewhere else, we could incorporate information that's probably often collected for some process improvement measure at your place and put it right into here. This allows for a little bit more similar comparison between sites and allows for calculation of results without you having to do that separately. So all of the data entry screens that we are building or have built will go into the other postpartum or neonatal information section. As you can see, the NICU breast milk feeding at 28 days will go in there. That was sort of a late comer and is in the process of being built. We have the skin-to-skin in contact with the infant that has 4 selections there, and then mom-baby interaction and the separation parts. There's 5 questions for that. Next slide, please. This is just showing, for example, the mom-baby interaction one filled in as one example. This person had, they weren't rooming together partly because of her diminished responsiveness, perhaps she's post-C-section, and there was some separation, and they pumped between 5 and 6 hours. One of the other things I do want to point out is there is probably more information on these data entry screens than is necessarily going to be in the final numerator and denominator for, you know, hitting your 90% target or whatever it may be. And again, this was done purposely so that as you're kind of digging deeper into information, you can see, oh, we are a little short here, and if we just get a few more cases, we can bump this up. So that's why some of the extra information is in there. Next slide, please. In the skin-to-skin data entry selection, what I've put in here is what the choices are. So we do have skin-to-skin immediately after birth, yes, but it wasn't right away, known, unknown. If you say yes to any of those, you won't even get this reason for separation. But if they weren't placed skin-to-skin, you can get some QI information as to why they weren't. For example, the baby wasn't stable and so forth. Mom didn't want to, or, hey, we just didn't offer it up. The skin-to-skin duration, if yes is picked, we have a variety of times. As you saw before, we were targeting the 60 minutes or more. But again, for QI, you could mark these other ones, and maybe at least if most of them had been under 30, and now you're going up to 30 to 44, that's still an improvement for you. The assessments done skin-to-skin, if you had answered yes, they did have skin-to-skin, then if those things were done, you have yes, no, and unknown choices. Next slide, please. Then there will also be placed into Peridata what the definition of each of these is. I will put a bit of caution on this. No matter how we describe this, I think from site to site there could be a little variation. What's important with this is that your site in your organization, each and every time, you're calling this the same thing. So while we don't say they stayed skin-to-skin, you know, till the first feeding, etc., it can mean whatever you're wanting it to on here for the minutes and so forth. So what I've highlighted is there's only three things that are actually going into the measure: the yes immediately after birth, 60 minutes or more, and were procedures done. Those are things going onto the measure, but the rest of this stuff helps give you an idea of why something was not happening, and so you can see those. Next slide, please. The rooming in data entry section really only has two little parts to it. One is, did they room together the 23 hours or not? And if not, why not? And again, this is where it's going to become important for you guys to have a definition of what is diminished responsiveness to infant cues. Oftentimes that tends to be with our C-sections who are really over-medicated. I shouldn't say over-medicated. Receiving the medications they need early on and are not able to be responsive. Next slide, please. And then here again are the definitions. And again, with the responsiveness, for example, it talks about medications taken or fatigue, that she can't safely respond to the baby, and so forth. We added the rooming together during the day but not at night because oftentimes that's a baby-friendly question that's asked. And then you can see some of these other choices for medical reasons for mom or baby, why they were not able to be together. Next slide, please. For the pumping and manual expression category, this is used to capture the actual separation of the baby. We're hoping to be able to have this open up for sure if I've selected yes to NICU, but there's obviously other times when separation can occur throughout the stay. A day or two later, the baby's transferred, or maybe it needs to be taken care of someplace else besides by the mom's room, etc. So if I say, yes, they were separated, then we can open this up and talk about whether they did pump or not. And we added the extra thing there. They didn't pump, but they do plan to breast milk feed, or no, they weren't planning on doing that at all anyway. And then if they did pump, then we have these different hours. And in the next slide, I guess I can show you which ones count, if you will. Okay. So when they're separated, part of what we talk about here is usually the separation is considered enough time to have missed an infant feeding, such as about 4 to 6 hours. So it does not include periods of time when mom is choosing not to room together. So if she's separated because it's her choice, that may not be what we're looking for. We're looking for more of that actual, usually it's a medical reason why they're separated. So if I mark yes there, a yes on the expression, and then all these types of hours count, but you may find that we're at 5 to 6 hours and now we're getting better and getting in at 3 to 4, whatever. Any one of those counts. The 7 or more, at least they were pumping, and there's also that unknown choice. Next slide, please. And then the ones that are in the process of being built is the NICU feeding at 28 days. So first of all, it'll open up if the baby was in NICU. And then the first question asked, were they there at 28 days of life? Some kids go into the neonatal intensive care or special care nursery, but by the time they're 28 hours, they've already been discharged or what have you. So we would mark yes to that, and then this would open up, was the baby given any breast milk during that 28th day of life? And then we have yes, no, they received formula, no, they were NPO, and unknown. And if they did receive breast milk, we put in mom's milk, some kind of combination of mother and donor milk, and also donor milk, because yes, those are all milk feedings, but people may want to take a look at what types they're getting. Next slide, please. And I see I didn't highlight one thing here. The things that sort of count, if you will, is actually, I did do it right. The yes, and if they received any milk, that's what's going to put it into the measure. The rest of these down as the type of feeding is probably more for your own internal taking a look at. So you can see what those definitions are. So those are all the data entry things that talk where you can find them and also what the definitions are. If we go to the next slide, I kind of cut and pasted what the WSPIC summary report looks like. This is the one that puts everything together and summarizes it. The top part of the WSPIC report still contains all your hypertension information, and then further down onto the second part starts the breast milk measures. I do see this is a little small, but there is a place there right at the top in kind of light gray that talks about the number of records that were missing some kind of information. This is a good quality check for you and a first pass at did we fill in enough of the information on each record in order for the computer to even process the answer. So pay attention to that as you're going along. The first thing is skin to skin with infant. The only thing that kind of really counts, if you will, is on the left side, the immediately after birth. We did put one in for, these are all laid out pretty similarly. The first is all deliveries, then it's vaginal, and then cesarean. So we had each of those measured out, and I suspect in many organizations at least, it might be easier to achieve that skin to skin on the vaginal bursts than the sections, although I do know that a lot of places have done a lot of great work at getting the babies immediately skin to skin even on their cesareans. On the right side is not immediately after birth, but they did do it at least for 60 minutes. And so that's another quality improvement thing to just see, hey, are we making some improvements there? On to the next page, then we have the skin-to-skin for procedures and assessments. And then we follow with the rooming in at least the 23 hours. So next slide, please.
Okay. And Lisa, it looks like there's a question too. The S2S measure length of time does not include through the first breastfeed, which is an option in the criteria consistent with baby-friendly criteria. Is there a reason for that?
I think that's going to be determined at the individual place where it's through first feed. So we could probably amend the definition to say 60 minutes or through first feed. But yeah, we'll have to take a look at that. Some of this stuff was a bit of a moving target as we were doing it. Overall, though, A1 talks about I think the full 60 minutes, although I might be mistaken on that one right now too. The idea, though, at present, the way it's worded, I probably count it as yes if it made it through the first feeding, even if that was at 47 minutes or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
And then, again, separation and pumping or manual expression. All newborns separated from their moms. And the main thing we have for separating out the moms in these cases is if there was a maternal ICU admission or she was planning the formula feed, I think is off of there already. So again, we can do it by delivery type. I think in this case, I don't think we did separate it out by it, so it's that first one that counts as your measure, but I think you may want to see if there's any difference coming through by route of delivery. And then the exclusive breast milk feeding is just PCO5 and PCO5A. And I don't have the end of it because it's not built yet, would be the NICU at 28 days stuff. That would probably follow after the PCO5 and O5A. And then the next one, please. And then the one other thing I want to do at the bottom of all your summary reports actually is at the end of the report it says what criteria are being used for calculations on here. And if you go to the very last statement, it says all breast milk measures are based on infant's date of discharge. So we wanted to kind of level the playing field, if you will, so that especially because PCO5 is measured off of baby's date of discharge, all of those measures are by baby's date of discharge. So I will give you the caution that especially, for example, you're running January data, if you've got kids that delivered at the end of December or maybe even earlier because they were in NICU, we're probably going to have a few little gaps in there just because people probably weren't starting to use those data entry fields yet. So kind of keep that in mind that if I run January 1st to January 31st for this part of the measure, it's going to be baby's date of discharge. Okay, now moving from summary to patient level reporting. There's also patient-level reporting data for all of WSPIC, and it runs kind of far to the right because there's an awful lot of stuff in there, but it allows you to figure out which patients were in and out of which measure. Again, I had fake stuff here, so there's not much to see, but that second to last one has separated and pumping was in both the numerator and denominator here. So if I wanted to go look at who that was, I can scroll on over and find it. That bottom one was no and no. If I want to go check on that patient, I can as well. Next slide, please. This is still scrolling way to the right. We have more information too as far as that finer point. So for example, in column CR, the number of minutes that they were pumping, or I mean, sorry, this is skin-to-skin duration, how many minutes they were skin-to-skin, and also some information for any part of the measure there. So what I then went and did, if you want to go to the next slide, please. By pulling this stuff out, what you can do is do a pivot table and a number of other things to look at information. But for example, you could take a look at, okay, of the people who had immediate skin-to-skin, how many minutes were they doing it? And that's column D, row 5. And of course, I've got only one in there. But the point is you can take a look and see how many minutes were they. And then, yes, but not immediately after birth, how many were in there. So this part gets much more granular, if you will, and allows for a better comparison as you're trying to work through your quality issues. So that gives a brief overview, I think, of what elements are going to be in the data entry, what the definitions are, what you can get for summary level data, and then what you can use for quality improvement to get at patient level data. So hopefully that gives you an insight into what we've built in there. So I'll turn it back over to Kyle. Thank you.
And thank you, Lisa. One of the things that WSPIC wants to do is to support anybody who's interested in following any of these measures. And so to that end, we will be developing a change package that will include specific tools that could be used for each of the measures. Some of these might be related to behavior changes, like for example, if you know that you might run up into resistance with some people because they might not have all the most current research on what's going on. We will have some of those references available so that you can use those to support any kind of discussion that you're having with people to try to change behaviors. Some of them might be specific tools that can be used, and one of the things that we are going to be, that we're happy to have be a part of is the COFACTIVE initiative. For those of you who are working in WIC or in some of the hospitals, you may have heard about COFACTIVE, but it's a way of standardizing the education on breastfeeding for women prenatally and during the hospital stay so that moms are getting the same message wherever they are. And this is going to be very useful, we think, in supporting this particular initiative. The change package contents will be located currently on the WAPC website. When you go to the WAPC website, and I'm going to put my cursor over the column or the tab that you would click, there's a major initiatives one. If you click on that, it will open up to a list of initiatives, the bottom one of which is the Wisconsin Perinatal Quality Collaborative, WSPIC. And then if you go to the What We Are Doing page, you will see this picture that's on your screen right now. Maternal hypertension is there. That's the first initiative that WSPIC did, and human milk feeding. And when you click on that, as we get these materials in there, you will be able to access information about the initiative, information about the measures, change package components, and all that kind of information. Now, having said that, WSPIC is in the process of developing its own independent website, and that will probably be available during the first quarter of 2017. So what you see right now is going to change, and we will certainly let you know when that change has taken place to let you know where those things are located. One of the things that we learned with the initiatives on hypertension is that it's helpful to have a standard way of submitting the data. You can collect it through Peridata or you can collect it manually. We developed a tool, a mechanism for submitting data with SurveyMonkey, and it seems to have worked well. We have not gotten negative feedback from people who participated in the hypertension initiative that used it. And from our end of actually downloading information and interpreting it, working with it, it's quite easy. So we will have a link that's available to SurveyMonkey so that data can be entered specifically for the different measures. Now, one of the questions that's worth asking is, what are the benefits of doing this? In the most simple terms, human milk is good for babies. It's been shown over and over again. That's not a problem. But the other things I think we can tie into the Institute for Healthcare Improvement's triple aim. Things looking at patient satisfaction, population health, and the per capita cost of healthcare, the economics. Certainly patient satisfaction is a big part of it. Joint Commission looks at PCO5 in part to look at as a to go along with the patient satisfaction part about how many of you work with facilities that send out regular surveys on the patient experience, and how many times does it come up that there may have been issues related to breastfeeding. And we think that this initiative is going to be a way of addressing that. So if you're in a healthcare facility for which this is important, this is going to be critical. We can't underestimate the population health benefits of it. We know that it's good for babies, and when we look at things like skin to skin, we can to make the connection to the microbiome, and if you follow that literature or if you're aware of it, you know that this is a growing area of interest, of importance for overall infant health. And then finally, there's the cost basis of this, the economics, the per capita impact of this. And with this particular project, we think that there is a lot of cost benefit built into this, both short term in terms of the breastfeeding itself, but also long term with the long-term health benefits. So if you're trying to make an argument for why this is important, those are probably a good starting point. We just got a question in, so these new measures are not mandatory at this time. This is something each facility will decide on. That is correct. We are offering these, and each facility can take a look at their own environment, their own population, and say what's going to make the biggest difference, what's going to move the dial, what's going to improve practice and outcomes, and select those particular measures. So the next steps, if you're interested in participating in this, we will send a link to SurveyMonkey on Monday that will have 2 pages. The first page is basic enrollment information, who's the contact person, what's the name of the facility or agency, what's the email address for that person. And then the second page is going to list the measures, and we'll have those spelled out specifically by the measures where you have one of 3 choices. You can say yes, no, or not sure. That gives you a chance, like if there's some that you might be interested, to go back and talk to the stakeholders who may be the people who make the decisions whether or not that's something that your facility should be doing. If you have questions about any of this after this webinar, you can feel free to email the WISPIC email address that you see on the screen, wispqc@perinatalweb.org, and we will get back to you and try to answer your questions as best as we can. Now, if you look at this and you say, this is really exciting, I like the direction this initiative's going, I want to know what's going on next, I want to be part of the bigger picture, we invite you also to consider joining WISPIC itself. And you can use the same email address and send your interest, your questions and stuff like that to that address, and we can get you the materials you need to be part of the larger collaborative itself. Now, at this point, I think we can open it up for questions and have a couple of ways you can do this. There's a question panel on your the webinar screen that you can click on, and you can write your question in there, and we'll see that come up to us right now. Or if you want to, you can raise your hand. You're all muted right now, but if you have a question, I can unmute you so that you can ask the questions that you have. So, are there any questions? And it may be the kind of thing that you think about this for a little bit, you go back to the website, the WISPIC part of that, and you say, that's a question that I didn't have at the time. Feel free to just send it in to us, and we'd be happy to take a look at it and address it and get back to you with a response. Kate, Lisa, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
The only thing I think I'll add is for, again, because I'm more on the peridata side of it for this talk, is for those who are going to do this, the fields will be required, if you will, at your facility in order to be able to process the numerators and denominators. Again, this isn't required in any way, but it's sort of a way for the data entry people to have an idea of, oh gee, I do need to address this so that the information is complete, is my one thing. And my second thing, again, is leveraging whatever systems you have that it's going to kind of merge your actual maybe EHR stuff with any other quality work you can do is going to go a long way with this. And if you do have ways that you can use these things for multiple uses, that's all helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Kyle, this is Ann Conway. Will you be posting this webinar online?
Yes, thank you. It's a good question, and we will be doing that. When this is concluded, there'll be a little delay time because we have to go through the rendering it to get into a format that we can do that, but that will be uploaded to the website, and then we will send out information when that's available to you also if you want to look at this again. or any part of it.
Thank you.
Okay, and if again, I don't see any other questions right now, and I don't see any hands raised, but I encourage you to take a look at this, to consider the importance of human milk in whatever you do, whether it's in public health, in the community, prenatal care, hospital-based work, but to take a look at the role human milk can play in improving the health of the moms and babies for whom you provide care, and to look at how some of these measures can help set benchmarks or standards that can help guide you towards quality improvement in those areas. Okay. So with that, I guess we will go ahead and close this. And thank you all for your time. For those of you that are expecting a lot of snow, I hope you travel safely without any difficulties, and we will be in touch with you. Oh, and I will mention too that participation in this initiative also comes with other benefits too. The opportunity to meet regularly by phone or go to meeting to talk about the progress you've made, the difficulties you've encountered, the solutions to some of these difficulties and all that. So it brings you into a stronger sense of community as well. Okay, thank you very much and have a good day.